Hi, everyone. I will introduce myself before we properly start. I'm Gini. I'm the founder and creative director at Interior by Gini, which is an interior design studio based in Vienna and Munich, but really we are working across the globe wherever our clients are. And I particularly focus on private homes and residents, but also commercial spaces. So things such as hotels, restaurants, shops, basically anything that is related to interior design as well as interior styling. So also styling spaces for shootings or also for magazine covers or even for events. I'm also the founder of the Interior by Gini masterclass, which has just launched a few weeks ago. So if that's something that's interesting for you, make sure to also check that out. And then lastly, I'm also a content creator, which is also why a lot of people have joined. I combine a following of over 260,000 followers who join me on my everyday basis and accompany me on my projects. And let's start right into it to look at how you can train your eye in interior design. Today, we will be looking at 4 topics, which are the most important parts when it comes to training your eye in interior design. However, I have to say that that's obviously not everything because the topic is huge. So we would be stuck here for days if we talk about everything that comes into interior design. So first of all, that's why we will be talking about understanding visual balance, where we have a few other subtopics joining in, as well as the power of texture and materials, which is one of my favorite topics ever, with also talking about textiles. Then the role of color and room specifications and details, which is the last topic that I think is super neglected and just talked about far too little. Before we will then be looking at how you can actually develop a critical eye with those 4 topics in mind, as well as we will be looking at a few examples. But starting off, before we dive into visual balance, it is always important to note that when looking at interior design and also when it comes to training your eye, it is extremely important to put aside personal preference, because if you are really stuck on the one design that you want to see and the one style that you like, you will not be able to identify what good interiors look like. So you can see in the example photos that we have very different interior designs, but they all look complete, they put together, and they just have that something that makes them really special. And you will also see that all of those interiors that you see here also work with the 4 topics that we will be talking about today. But if you would be stuck really on the one design that you like, it would make it very difficult for you to actually realize how good other interior designs are as well. So when talking about interior design and what makes a good interior design, it's important to put your personal preference aside, because we really want to capture where you can see it's been curated, how the thought behind designing is. And so if you do not do that, then it will be quite hard for you also to train it. But again, you do not have to want to live in any of those spaces that we are discussing. And that's actually also the beauty in interior design, that we do not have every single room look the same, but we actually have a creative space so we can all see very different and unique styles. And that's what we will be looking at today. And before we also get started, another great way to look at interior design is also to see before and after photos, because those hold the power to show you how you can actually transform a space and how you can really integrate different aspects of it that we will also be looking at later on, as well as working with the room specifications that you have. So you don't even have to renovate fully. You don't have to change the floor plan, and just the styling of it already makes a massive part of it. And so in all of those photos, when you go back at the end of the presentation again, you will also notice that all of the things we talk about today have been executed in the before and after photos, as well as in the other interior designs. So that is just something to keep in mind. And that's why I will dive right into the topic with understanding visual balance. Now, visual balance is super important because it does create that feeling that you just get to a space and everything just works out. And there are so many different topics that go into that actually, but today we will be focusing on 3 different ones. And I just wanted to show you 2 more examples, because examples just show really how you can really improve a space with only doing a few little things. And even though, and that is one of my favorite things I have to say when it comes to visual balance, is that the massive transformation can also even be when you have the same furniture. So as you can see here in the example that we actually have the same furniture in the same space, but the left photo just looks completely empty, boring, bland, and just not finished, while at the right photo you can see that we just have that visual balance, that everything works out, that everything looks nicely, that everything is put together. And so that is quite important when it comes to that, even though we didn't do any big renovations. And the second example is also one of my favorite before and afters, because you can see it's the same furniture that was used in both images. So we have the same nightstands, we have the same bed, and we even have the same room. However, the only thing that was changed here is that we created a visual balance with the right decor elements, with the right symmetry, with the right textiles and textures. That is the other topic that we will be talking about later on, as well as the color theory has been included. So those things are just something to keep in mind. And I also hope that this makes people hopeful and also very positive, because you don't always need to fully renovate a space to make it look complete and come together, because you can already work with simple things such as proportions and scale to achieve a good look. And so when looking at visual balance, we will be looking at 3 different topics that I always like to work with, because I think we see the most coming out from those and you can really easily implement them. The first topic of that is working with symmetry and asymmetry. Now, it's a fundamental concept in interior design, and I think you definitely have seen both of them, with symmetry being the one where it's usually a very calming and predictable outcome, and asymmetry is usually a very dynamic and informal style. So if we look at 2 examples, you can see on the left side, we have a photo with a very symmetrical interior design. So we have the fireplace, we have 2 open shelves on each side, and we also have 2 matching lounge chairs, as well as we can actually see that the rug that was used also has symmetrical items in it. So we can really see it's a very calming atmosphere, and it is quite predictable and clean as well. While on the right side, we can see that we have a asymmetrical interior design style. So we have a sofa, we have different lounge chairs, we have coffee tables, and there's not a right placement with them. So you don't have something that you really see, okay, it's right the same next to one another. It is more organic and more fluid, and that is why you can already see that it's more informal in the right photo. If we look at it in more depth, you can see also that symmetry in interior design often also creates a sense of order and stability, which is also why it's often associated with classical or traditional design styles. So it's also always considered as very formal and very neat and very clean. So there's not a lot going on, and that's a perfect place to use if you want some sort of formality and also structure. And as you can see in the photo on the left side, which is actually my living room, you can see that I've worked with symmetry there as well, because I really wanted to create that traditional feeling in the old and historic building that I have. So I was working with 2 lounge chairs that are the same. They are divided by a lounge desk in the middle, as well as a coffee table. And the thing with symmetry is that you can basically mirror the items. So if you would place a mirror in the middle of the axis of the photo, you would pretty much get the same outcome on the other side. So that is always something to keep in mind. And we will be looking at a few more examples in a minute as well. But with the mirroring, you can see that a lot of times symmetry is used in interior design with having the same lamps on both nightstands, having the formal salon style in the living room layout, which is one of the layout designs that I also discuss in my masterclass quite a lot, which is how you can rearrange furniture. And then you also have open shelves with a fireplace in the middle, as we saw in the previous photo. So there are many ways you can actually incorporate symmetry in interior design. And then when we look at asymmetry, especially if we see the photo compared to the one we had before, we can already see that there's a lot more going on, and it's not as clean and formal. It is much less predictable. So you can see it's more about creating a visual interest than actually the perfect mirroring. So imagine if we would put a mirror in the axis on that photo that we have here. We wouldn't get the same. We would get a completely different outcome. So we have shelves on one side, we have a painting on the other side, we have a sofa that is not straight and that is actually having a funky shape. We have an organic shaped coffee table, as well as we have a rug with a very strong pattern. So you can really see that there is not a lot of symmetry used in that. However, the thing with asymmetry is that it can actually also create balance with using different colors, different patterns, shapes, and heights. So it's always really tricky to work with that. And I think it can also look quite childish and also chaotic if you don't know how to properly do it. So asymmetry in interior design can actually be quite hard. However, as we can see in the photo on the left, there have also been a few other things that were used in order to create that balance. I will be just pointing a few things out so you have an idea of how you can work with that. So we can see that we have a painting that has quite a lot going on. However, we also have a rug with a large pattern. And then when we look at the little lounge chair that we can slightly see on the left-hand side, you can see that we also have a pattern there. And all of those patterns kind of resonate with one another. And so they are kind of balancing each other out. So we do not have a piece that is super, super strong. We actually have multiple patterns to just really blend in nicely. And although there is a lot going on also with the different elements, with the sculptures in the open shelves and with the pillowcases and also with the flowers, we can see that we have colors reappearing and also different patterns to just blend in nicely. Now, looking at a few examples side by side, I think that is where you will see the biggest difference with symmetry and asymmetry. Now, these are examples for symmetry, and you can really see those are perfect examples for symmetrical interior designs. On the left side, you can see that we have the typical layout that we already looked at before, with two open shelves divided by a fireplace in the middle. And then in that case, we actually also have two sofas on each side with two matching lounge chairs to really divide it, as well as we actually also have the ceiling in the exact perfect symmetry. So if you would put a mirror there, you would really get the same outcome, except for the decor, such as the side table and the lamp. However, you would really have a perfectly symmetrical interior design. And the same goes for the bedroom, which is also a place where a lot of people like to use symmetry. And we can see that here that we have the same rug, which will appear on both sides if we would put a mirror there, as well as we have some wall decor, which would mirror perfectly. We have the two matching nightstands and the lamps above the nightstands, as well as we have the pendant lamp in the middle, which would also be perfect for mirroring. So you can really see if you look at those, and especially if we will take a look at the other ones in a minute with asymmetry, this is a really nice way to create some balance and also just some calmness and structure. Looking at asymmetry, I think you can already tell the big difference that we have here. So it's a much more informal style. We have a lot going on. It is very interesting, but it's just not as clean and structured. So we have very interesting lamps that do not have a symmetry. We have a sofa with a funky shape. We have elements distributed across the room. And so we are creating something very interesting here. However, it is just really not as structured. And so in order to keep those two things in mind, because obviously symmetry and asymmetry are basically just complete different aspects and approaches to interior design, I always like to use a mix of the two of them, because with working only with symmetry, it can be quite difficult and also kind of dangerous that you end up having a complete boring space that looks too predictable and just very sterile. While when you're only working with asymmetry, you can just have something that looks, as I said, a bit chaotic and also sometimes even childish if you don't know how to execute it correctly. So that's why I always really love to work with a mix of those both styles. And so as you can see on the left photo, we actually have a room that is not very symmetrical. So we have open shelves, we have a painting, we have a window, and then we also have a table and a rug, which are not symmetrical, but we do have two matching lounge chairs. So those two chairs already bring in some sense of calmness and also some sense of where it's very formal, where you have something that really harmonizes very well. And so if you imagine a completely different chair, like a yellow chair in there, it would really create some sense of chaos. And that's why this is a great way to include that. And in the other photo that we have, you can see the perfect example of also the symmetrical shelves on the back, as well as like the bar that we have in the middle. Perfect example for symmetrical items used is the pendant lamp, which is insane. If you would put a mirror there, you would get exactly the same outcome. And we also have a rectangular shaped coffee table. And that is also with, even though we have the very interesting legs, but if you would put a mirror there, you would get the same outcome. However, we are also looking at a few asymmetrical items because we have different chairs, we have them placed across the table in different positions. We have a lot of decor elements that are also just placed. They might seem as if they're placed randomly, but they're not placed symmetrical. And then we also have the rug, which has a very strong pattern. So that would also leave us with no symmetry. And so it's really nice to have that mixture because it just makes the space feel personal and also curated and just brings in a lot of character. And it's just not that you enter a space and you're like, okay, it's symmetrical, it's asymmetrical, but you're actually working with a few other elements. However, again, you can, of course, only use one of the two because that is also a perfect way to include that in the interior design that you like. Next up, once we dive deeper into understanding visual balance, is the rule of thirds. Now, the rule of thirds is actually something where we have a lot of different aspects, and you can have the rule of thirds, and especially the number 3, you will find a lot in interior design. So I think the most common rule of 3 is where you are actually talking about arranging 3 different items together to create balance. And that is also what you can see on the left side in the photo, where we have 3 different items placed together. Ideally, these items are also in different heights and also sometimes different shapes, because with those different heights resonating to one another, you are also picking up on different sizes in the room. And that is also important for the proportions and scale that we will be talking about in a second. That is just really bringing everything together, and we are not risking of having 2 large items paired with 2 small ones. And that's why we are trying to find the middle with those 3 items. Then there is another rule of 3, which is actually in color choices. And we will be talking about color afterwards as well. And you will also be able to identify that in some of the examples that we have, which is also known as the 60, 30, and 10 rule, which is where you would have 60% a main color, 30% a secondary color, and then 10% an accent color. And you can really work with that. I mean, of course, it's not, you don't have to have it, but it is always quite nice and always a safe way to go to create something interesting and also to just have some balance. And then, of course, there is also the rule of 3 in textile and material combinations. So in order to not have a very sterile and boring look, you can definitely also work with different textiles and material combinations to really ensure that you have a nice visual balance. And because the rule of 3 when it comes to styling and decorating different items is the most important and also the most famous one, I just wanted to show you a few more examples because those are also the interesting parts to have. As you can see, we have different examples here with the nightstand where you have the table lamp, where you have a vase, and then you have books next to it. So we have 3 items grouped together. Then in the middle, you can see we have a coffee table set up where we have 2 candle holders and a vase, as well as on the right side we have a grouping of 3 different sculptural vases, which is also just, as you can see, in different heights and different shapes, but they're resonating well with another, so we're just creating some visual balance. And once we have that in mind, it is important to look at different proportions and also scales. So proportions and scales is something that is extremely important in interior design, but don't worry, we will not be talking too much about numbers and stuff like that. It's actually more that you can really easily implement that in your own home. So the aspects of proportions and scales is that you have the rule to create elements and to use elements in a space that feel and look appropriately sized to each other. So with proportions, we are talking about actually using different elements such as decor items and furniture that fit well to one another in the design. So that would be something like having a vase that isn't too big for a side table, that is having a coffee table that is not too big for the sofa, while the scale ensures that the furniture that you use is in the right proportion to the actual space that it's in. So that would be if you have a massive space, you do not want to choose a sofa that looks completely lost in the space, but rather something that just works also to the scale of the room. And if you have those two things in mind, then you're already very far with designing a proper interior, because proportions and the scale already make up a very big part of it. Now, how would I recommend to work with proportions and scale, and what can you do to have that in your own home? So we already talked about the rule of three with grouping different items. I think that's always a very safe way to go, because again, we are using different elements and we are combining them, and we are also making sure that all of the different sizes in the room are used and also respected. You could do that with vases, but you could also do that with pillows, with different furniture and decor elements. So just keep that in mind, because that really brings in a lot of character and it just makes the room much warmer. When it comes to proportions, I always love to use, we have the number 3 again, 2/3 as a scale kind of. So that would mean that you would work with a sofa and a coffee table, where the coffee table would be around 2/3 of the size of the sofa. So that is always a really good way to go, because you are very safe with the choices that you take. Sometimes it can be 1/2, but I think I personally always prefer the 2/3 rule. It's also something that I very often use when it comes to wall moldings and wall decor, so that I actually have the wall split up in 2/3, and that's how I distribute the wall moldings. And then lastly, I think it's always important to obviously keep in mind the scale of the room. So if you have a very large space, it might make sense to anchor that with the eye, so that your eye is not wandering across an empty floor, but that you, for example, rather add a very large rug or a big sofa, just to really have a piece that really brings the room together. And the same goes for smaller spaces. However, we have a little bit of a different situation with smaller spaces. And that's why I always recommend to keep smaller spaces clutter-free, just because they will look very overcrowded and chaotic, and we do not want to have that. And then lastly, which is kind of already based on all of the topics that we talked about, is guiding the eye. That is something that, in my opinion, always creates a very nice visual balance, because that is when your eye is actually led through the interior design. That is something that I think comes from art originally and from photography, where you have something that your eye is guided through and it's not blocked by anything or distracted. So in that case, I always like to use larger elements such as vases, such as lamps on the outside of the room. So you will often see that in my designs, that I have the vases on the outside of the coffee table, for example, but also lamps that I have the higher elements on the outside, such as in a corner in the room, or you can even have it in the furniture styling itself. So you could have, for example, if you style a sideboard, you can have the larger items on the side of the sideboard, and you do not want to have it in the middle, blocking your sight and just distracting you. So if you enter a room, I think it's always nice to have different heights also, to make it interesting, because you do not want to be blocked by a large element and then that's it. You actually want the different textures and textiles as well as heights to speak to you. And then also, of course, the layering of different items and especially textiles, because that just makes it very interesting and will lead to your eye being constantly looking at things and not just skimming it and saying, okay, I've seen everything. You actually work with different materials. And that is already a very good transition to the next topic that we have, because I already talked about layering different textiles. And that is actually the power of textile and materials, which is one of my absolute favorite things to use because it adds so much depth and character. And if we look at the left photo, it has a lot of different materials and textiles and therefore also texture. And even though, keep in mind, it might not be a space that you want to live in personally, but you can really see a lot is going on and it just does look very cozy. And if we look at the different things that we have here, you can see we have a textured rug, we have tiles underneath it, we have a lacquered table with wood, and we also have it polished. Then we have boucle as a textile, we have a different fabric on the lounge chairs, we have a different textured wall lamp, and also the curtains. So there is a lot of texture going on there, and that is also making the space very interesting. And so just keep that in mind, that already with working with different textiles and textures, you can completely change the look of a space. And that is also something to keep in mind, especially if you want to create a certain interior design style. So if you want to work, for example, with a rustic interior design style, it might be worth looking at materials that work well with that. So you want to have something that is very natural, sometimes with exposed brick or wood, so that you really bring in that feeling. And there are different types of textures that can be classified. I mean, of course, that's not all, but those are just some examples for you to keep in mind. We can have soft textures such as velvet, silk, cashmere, wool. So that's all of those soft, nice materials that you like to touch. Then we have hard textures, which is something like wood, rock, and even glass. We have rough textures, which would be perfect for a rustic interior design, for example, such as exposed brick, unfinished wood. We have clay. So that would be also all of those boho and antique aspects. And then we also have smooth textures, which would be something like polished items, lacquered glass, and something like that. So those are the things to keep in mind, because using textiles and different materials adds a lot to the interior design. And as I already showed you before, all of these examples are actually rooms where we didn't completely change the floor plan. We actually just worked with design and interior styling. And if you use all of those different materials, you will always create a very nice looking, cozy space. That's my number one top tip that I always give. If you layer different items and materials, it will just really bring the room together. And I always love to work with a lot of natural materials. So I always try to bring in texture while using wood, wool, cotton, linen, and all of those things. And even if it's the smallest things, such as a bowl or a candle holder, or even the flowers that you use, just make sure that it has something interesting, because that will just really resonate well with the full space. And next up, we will be looking at the role of color. Now for that, we will be taking a quick stroll to color theory, because we will also be looking at the psychological aspects that colors hold. And I always love to work with the color wheel that I am working with from Johannes Itten, which is just really interesting to keep in mind. And you will also be seeing it later on, because also for you to sort which color you see and which color you're using, that is just always a very nice thing to work with. Now, the color wheel is what you see in the middle, and that is existing from different colors. Now, it was developed to classify colors and also to show how different colors are mixed, as well as it shows the biggest contrast in colors. So usually the colors that are straight across from one another in the color wheel hold the biggest contrast, and you can also see the different nuances. We're starting off with primary colors very quickly, which are the colors that are also highlighted here, and that is yellow, red, and blue. And those are special because they can be used to mix all other colors in the color wheel. However, they cannot be mixed from other colors. So they solely exist on their own. And you can see on the left side a photo where we have an example with interior design where the primary colors have been used. And that is also where we can go back to the 60-30-10 rule that we looked at when the rule of threes, where you can see that we have the primary color of red, which is used in the lamp, in the side table, in the sofa, in the pillowcases, and in the footstool. Then we have the secondary color, which is blue on the wall and also in the painting. And then we have yellow as the accent color, which is also in the flowers and also in the pillowcases. Next up, we have secondary colors, which are the colors that are right outside of the primary colors. So you can see here we have green, orange, and purple, and they are mixed from two primary colors. So two primary colors that are next to each other mix those secondary colors. And the speciality about that is that the secondary colors have a mixture of 50-50. So for example, orange would be a 50% mixture of yellow and 50% mixture of red. Same goes for purple. We would have 50% blue and 50% red. And so they are actually quite strong with the color. And from those, you can transform to the tertiary colors. So the tertiary colors are the ones that you have around the color wheel, so the outer circle. And in that case, it's actually quite simple because we really have them classified. However, in reality, the tertiary colors can have any mixture. So it could be yellow and orange, and then you have different mixtures and you get a lot of different color tones. So that's also why tertiary colors are very often considered to be like the pastel colors that you get, and you can have very many different color nuances. Now, why was that important? Because you can already see from the color wheel how colors are existing and also what kind of contrast they are creating. And then the psychological aspects of color are that you can basically classify them into three different color palettes. Of course, there are many more, but those are the three popular ones that are also often used in interior design and also just easy to classify for you. So, for example, we can have warm colors. As you can see here, we have red, we have yellow, we have orange tones, and that is often considered to be very energizing and stimulating, which is perfect for rooms where you actually want to create that. And in that case, warm colors are actually because we consider them to be from the sun, from fire, so we relate to them with something warm. And that is also why they are considered to be the warm colors. While when we look at the cool colors, you can see that we have a very strong contrast between what we had with the warm colors and now looking at the cool colors, you can see with the blue and green tones that it is a very relaxing atmosphere, but it is definitely much more cooler. So if you go back, you can see that's a very warm space, and then we go into the cooler ones. And lastly, neutral colors are actually considered as a color palette in interior design, and they are often considered as being very timeless, also luxurious, very clean. And that is a great way if you do not want to have an interior where it's actually speaking to you when you enter the room, but it's actually more like the name already says, it's very neutral, it is very timeless, it holds back, and you can just exist in the space, and it will give you some space to breathe and to calm down as well. And it is important to keep these color palettes in mind because psychological aspects of color, we are looking at also things that it's proven that colors actually change the mood, the feel, and even bodily functions such as the heart rate from people. So that's why it is very important to keep in mind which color palette was used, which colors were included, and then with the color wheel, you can also keep in mind where they are coming from and also the different nuances. Now, before we look at a few more examples, it is also important to always look at color schemes. I think it's always nice to, when training your eye in interior design, I always love to get the colors that have been used, particularly also with the 60, 30, and 10 rule. However, I also think it's really interesting to look at the different color schemes. Now, the color schemes, we are actually differentiating between monochrome color schemes and color blocking. And I have to say, of course, there are many other things that go into those topics. So you could have even more dividers in each section. However, I think for you to understand and also to use it in your everyday life, it is the easiest if we work with the monochrome and with the color blocking style, because that is already where you can really identify differences. And if we look at the monochrome color scheme, you can see the two photos on the left, even though they are very different from the style and from the color palette that was chosen, we have monochrome interior designs. Because with the left one, we are looking at colors that, if you look at the color wheel, we have color nuances that are very closely linked to the red and pink and purple ones. So we have a dark purple, we have a dark red, like brownish red, we have a blush and a rosé. So all of those colors are very closely linked to one another on the color wheel in the tertiary colors. And so we are working in the same or in a similar color atmosphere, while we have color blocking on the other side. So with color blocking, you are typically choosing colors that are straight across from one another in the color wheel. And as you can see in the example photos, we have red and blue, which would be very straight across from one another in the color wheel, as well as in the second example on the right, we have different colors, even more. We have pink, we have blue, we have green, yellow, red. So basically all of them are really evenly split up. And you can see that those really create a completely different atmosphere. So when entering a space, it's always interesting to ask yourself what type of color scheme was used. Was it color blocking or was it monochrome? And then also thinking back to the colors that we discussed were warm colors. Are you in a cool environment or with neutrals? And so that is something that you can really train your eye and also then use for your own projects. And then lastly, we are talking about room specifications and the eye for detail. Now, I think room specifications is something that is completely neglected, and I barely hear people talk about it actually. So that's why I always like to point that out, because room specifications can be a huge factor if you want to create a proper and a good looking interior design. Now, room specifications are things such as what you have in the room. So what are you working with? That could be something such as windows, as doors. It could be the flooring that you have. Also, the ceiling height is always very important. So basically all of the things that are available in your room, or if you do not have the room and you're looking for the space or you're building something new, it is worth looking at what design style you like and then to look at, okay, does it make sense to use that? How do I incorporate these things? And what are the room specifications that make sense for that? So in the examples that we have here, we can actually see on the left side that we have a very modern skyscraper apartment with large windows. It is very modern. We don't have any elements at the window. We have a completely modern design. Then next to it, we have a cottage apartment. So you can really see we have very low ceilings. We have the wooden beams. We have smaller windows. So that is very different to what we saw in the first photo. And then on the other two photos, you can see that we have a typical Parisian apartment with a very rich wall moldings on the ceiling, on the walls. We have herringbone flooring. We have the traditional very high ceilings and also the nice looking doors. And then on the right, we have the photo where we have kind of like an industrial room specifications. So we have a ceiling which is exposed with the metal. We have different pipes showing up. We have the metal staircase in the back. So we really have very different room specifications for each one. And I always talk to my clients and also try to convince them to use the room specifications that they have. Because if you, for example, look at the cottage that we have, so the second photo from the left, we have very low ceilings and we also have the wooden beams. Now, if you would want to create an Parisian apartment or a Viennese apartment with very strong wall moldings, it might just be very difficult to include that because oftentimes the historic wall moldings also live from the high ceilings and the very grand and luxurious rooms that you have. So if you do not have that, it might not be worth including that. And especially if you're looking for such an interior design style, it might be worth to also look at buildings that offer the room specifications for that so you can actually execute it. Because I always say, if you take a look at the room specifications and if you also respect them, you will get the best results and it will be the easiest for you to implement the interior design. And the same actually goes for the eyes for details. That is something that is very important to train your eye for. So if you enter spaces, try to look at the details that you can find. So things such as light switches, sockets, as we can see on the left side. There are so many beautiful options out there, but I often see very ugly ones, and it's so easy to exchange that, and it's not as expensive as somebody might think. So it's a great option to include that. As well, as you can see, we have a corner that might have been neglected, but we have it filled with wallpaper, with trim, with wall moldings. And so we are really making the space look extremely unique and very pretty instead of just having something waiting there and looking boring. And it can also be even something such as the photo with the cat, where you can see somebody has paid attention to detail, as well as faucets in bathrooms or even the kitchen tap. So those are things that are quite easy to implement, but a lot of times are just neglected and forgotten. And the same goes for doorknobs, for door handles, window handles, embroidery, and in the curtains and in blinds, as well as also the transitions from floors. So really anything can be used for that, to really put your details in. And I always love to take a look at that, because for me, when I see the details have been paid attention to, then I know that is a good interior design where people have actually put thought and also a lot of work into it. Now that you have all of the tools for looking at interior design and training your eye, so we talked about visual balance, we also took a look at the textiles and the materials, as well as texture and also colors, and as well as the room specifications, it is time to finally start developing a critical eye. Now for that, as I already said in the beginning, it is super important to put your personal preferences aside. It's not about what you like, it's actually about seeing the intention and the curated interior behind it. So if you manage to put your personal preference aside, you will be much more successful to train your eye in interior design, as you're just very open for different topics. You will see different things that you might have not seen before, and you will be really diving into a world where you will see a lot of cool and creative things, because you're just not blending out the world, but you're actually opening up to see different designs. So that is something that is really tough for some people, I know, to work on. And even though you might not want to live in the space, it's just interesting for you to just keep open and enjoy looking at different designs. The second part is that you understand the concepts that we talked about today. So things such as visual balance, that you really train your eye for the rule of threes, that you take a look at and see, okay, 3 items have been grouped here. Now different textiles have been used there. Same goes for materials and for layering them, and also the texture that has been used, so that you really take a look at the things that are placed together. You ask yourself the questions, why were they placed together? Why do I like the look of that? And then also, of course, the role of color, which is what we already talked about right now, that you also can go into the space and really see the different color schemes that were used. So if it was color blocking, if you worked with monochrome colors, or also if you have some warm color palettes or neutral ones and cool ones. And then lastly, I think it's really important for you, if you want to train your eye in interior design, to really consciously experience interiors. Now that is already quite carefully linked to the first point, but it is really important that you kind of become an observer of yourself while observing interiors. And that is when you really also ask yourself what you feel, what you see, how does a room make you feel, how do different decor elements make you feel? Does a decor element tell a story? Do we have some sort of storytelling going on? And it doesn't necessarily have to be that you say, okay, why is this placed here? But it can actually be also the question, why is this bringing some sense of calmness to the room? Why is this something that is very interesting? Why is it something I'm actually looking at because it is placed in that corner? So you can really ask yourself all of those why questions and just really observe how you feel and how a space makes you feel in general when you enter a room and an interior design. And that way you can learn a lot about yourself and also about your personal preferences. You can also finally see a lot of very cool creative aspects, and then you can use that to either use it in your own home or just have it as a very nice benefit that you're just experiencing things on a different level than other people might do. And now we will be looking at a few best practice examples. We are starting off with a simple one. So that is just some training for you to see how you can understand the topic and how you can identify different things. And for that, we are looking at the first example, which is the interior that we see on the left. And for that, we will be looking at the different colors. So the main color, that is also the 60-30-10 rules. The main color, which was used 60%, has been brown in that case. So we have it on the walls, we have it on the floor, we can see it on the sofa and the lounge chair, as well as we can see the bar in the back is also a wood tone. So we are definitely looking at different brown tones. The secondary color, it's quite difficult to actually see, but the secondary color would be gray in that case, because we have gray chairs. We also have a kitchen counter that kind of looks like it's made out of stainless steel. We have the rug that is actually in a charcoal gray. And then the accent color, which would be the 10%, is the lamp, which is black, and also the side table that we see here. So you can really identify what was worked with here, and we have quite a dark interior design, but it's also kind of warm through the brown tones that we have. Next up, we are looking at this example, and that might already be a bit more difficult because we actually have the main color of dark green and olive, as you can see on the walls, as well as the secondary color is something that is light blue, as we can see with the sideboard and also with the table lamp. Now, the accent color, and of course we could argue about that, but the accent color in that room is not the purple as we see in the background with the kitchen, because the kitchen is actually a different room. So we are actually entering a different room. And although the kitchen was used intentionally in that color, because you can really see the transformation and it's really interesting to look into the next room, the accent color in that room would be the orange red tone that we have in the painting. Because imagine if you would close the door to the kitchen, you would really be left with the green, then the blue, and then the orange from the painting really standing out. And there's also something that might be worth looking at, because if you want to take it a step further, that would be to identify a few pro observations. And that would be in that case, for example, maybe some of you noticed, you could also type that in the chat if you did notice it, that we have the table lamp in the exact same color as the sideboard. And then we also have the door frame and also the picture frame in the same color as the wall, which is something that really brings a lot to the room because that completely changes the feel. If you would imagine to have a white door frame or a black or even a brass frame from the picture, that would look completely different. So these things have really been used intentionally to create that atmosphere that is quite calm, because everything is kind of tone and tone. But it's also just very special with that. And now it's your turn. I would like you to identify what the main color in this is. And you are right. Most people voted for green as the main color. You identified that correctly because we have it in the chairs, we have it in the painting and in the lamp. So please identify the secondary color that we are looking at here. For the secondary color, actually red is correct because we have the very, very strong ceiling. Now the beige would be more of a undertone that we have because that is just the basics that we were starting off with. But the red is really the color that was used mainly then as the second color. And because we only have the red on the ceiling, it is not as strong as the green that has been used at multiple different occasions. So you can also see it actually on the bar on the right hand side where we actually also have green glasses, we have the plants and everything. So you can really see that those colors have been used there. And then lastly, we want to take a look at the accent color. Let me know what you think the accent color here is. But we are working with purple here. Now the purple is visible in the painting that we have. It might not be too clear in the presentation, but it's actually a very soft purple that was used. And we also actually have it in the flowers. And so that is quite important to keep in mind because with the flowers, you can see how they were used intentionally as well. Because imagine having something like yellow flowers there. It would really bring the space out of its balance, and therefore the purple flowers really created some sort of stability as well. And for the pro observation, just to keep that in mind, again, if you want to take it a step further and you really want to take a look at the details, you might also be able to spot that we have a rug with a very strong pattern as well. And the rug might not be visible straight away because the ceiling is very strong. But if you take a look at it now and you really think about it, you can see that the rug with the texture and with the pattern balances out the ceiling. So if you would imagine that we just had a wooden floor, it might be that the ceiling is just too strong and really pulling us down. So we do not want that. And that's why the rug with the pattern is absolutely perfect. Another thing that you might have been able to observe is that we have lacquered elements and polished elements with the table that also matches the color of the kind of bar countertop that we have on the right, as well as the carpet also holds the same colors as the table. So the table is actually standing on one part where we have similar color schemes to it. So that is really nicely blending in as well. And if you want to take a look at the materials, obviously I already said we have very smooth textures with the lacquered wood and with the polished wood, as well as the leather and the metal on the chairs. So well done for that. So that's what we just talked about with the colors. And then let's take a look at the last example. Please identify the main color first. That might be a bit more difficult for you, but if you keep the color wheel in mind, you might be able to identify what the main color is. So red tones are actually the main color that we have here. And that is because, again, if you think of the color wheel, we have different nuances from those colors. So we actually have like the purple, we have the rosé, we have the red tone in the sofa and also in the vase. So you can see multiple different red tones that are just in different nuances. And that is also what is the main color. While when we take a look at the other ones at the secondary color, we are actually also having the yellow tones. So most of you voted correctly because the purple tones are already carefully linked to the red ones. But because the red is the primary color that we have all of those colors mixed from, it is really that those red tones are dominant in the design. And then we have the yellow tones as the secondary color, which is that we see on the sofa, we see it in the coffee table, and also partly in the picture behind it, as well as the brass lamp that we saw. And then lastly, let's take a look at the accent color. So most of you are voting for blue so far, and that is also correct because we really have the very, very strong painting with the blue really stand out. And we also have blue tones in the coffee table, as you might be able to tell. And then lastly, we will be looking at the pro observation. So I can already take away that the rule of thirds, which is also currently leading, is definitely correct. So you can see the rule of thirds is applied on the coffee table. We have the tray, then we have a sculptural piece, and then also a container, which I reckon might be a candle or something. So that is definitely the rule of three applied there. We also have the flowers actually resonate with the painting. Yes, you can see that too. We have the green tones that are gently coming in the painting, which you do not see at first, but they are really tying the space together. And then another pro observation to anyone who might have seen it is also that the rug goes all the way to the back of the room. So we do not have any floor showing out of it. So we do not have any wood or tiles underneath it. We actually have the rug go all the way to the room, which also actually makes a massive difference when it comes to interior design. So amazing. Thank you everyone for voting. So you're doing really great, and you will be able to also train your eye a bit further in the guide that you will get. We have included a few other examples for that, so you can just play around with that, and you also have like the checklist, what to keep in mind. And once you have trained your eye and you're getting ready to execute a project, so it could be that you are working as an interior designer, but also even if you just want to play around or design your own home, it might be worth to take a look at a different way to really organize your thoughts. And that is also the wonderful host from the sheet that we had today, which is where we will be looking at very quickly to show you how things look when you work with the sheet. Now, the sheet is a great software that I also work with for designs. And as you can see here in the screen, I just wanted to show you how the dashboard looks like. So you could have it organized as projects. And if you can see here, we can just click on the Beige, which is my own home, where I listed everything for myself. So I can really understand what I'm working with. And you can see we're just scrolling through a tiny bit. You can see the products I used. You can display them very differently, which makes it super easy for you to show. As well as you can also add like the different heights, different photos, the prices. So it's very easy for you to see and to just keep track of that. So that's always what I love to work with. And then also we have the opportunity to obviously include different products. So if you found something nice on the internet, you can easily implement it by adding it through the sheet. And for me, it's the easiest way to combine it, because you just have to click on it. You just type in some product specifications. You enter the photos, the price, as well as if you want, you could also add measurements or anything else that is interesting for you. You can even add something such as a description if you want to remember something, or if you want to keep different colors in mind. And then you can easily just add them to the project. And it's quite cool because you can either add them to a project directly. So for example, the living room, if you want to have it there. But you also actually have the opportunity to just add it to your library. So you can just have it in the library, and whenever you end up having a new project, you can browse your library and you can just add it wherever. So it's not product related and also not project related. So you can really collect everything that you see. So even if you're online and you see something you like, you can just include it in the product library and you have everything saved there. So it's kind of like a Pinterest mood board with even more specifications. And then you can add from the product library to a project. You can just add it and just, as you can see here, just choose the space you want to add it to. You can have sections, and then it will show up in the project. So from the dashboard, you go into the project where you edit it, and then it shows up. And so that is really nice to display it, and it's great for you if you want to use it on your own. However, if you have clients, or if you are a professional, or you want to share the project with somebody, you can just choose the different status, and you can have it go for approval, you can have it sent out as a proposal. So you can then share it with your clients, for example, and they can take a look at it. They have everything on one space. They can display it differently, and then it's super easy to work with that. So if you are getting closer to executing your own project, it might be worth for you to take a look at that and to just order all of your thoughts and have everything saved to one space. So yeah, that's just something that I wanted to share. And also, once again, thank you to thesheet for giving us the opportunity to play today and to host this webinar. I really enjoyed that. Amazing. All right. So thank you everyone so much for now. Let's take a look at some of your questions. Please feel free to answer, I will answer, to add all of your questions. We will go through them. Samia, the question that you had for commercial interior design, is one better than the other? No, you cannot really say if there is one thing working better than the other in commercial interior design. It really is also based on the interior design style that you are aiming for. So obviously, if you want to have a commercial space that is very cool, that is very unique, and also sometimes maybe even young, for younger people, for a younger audience, then of course asymmetrical interior design layouts might be very interesting. But if you have something where you really want to have that formal style and it requires some structure, then obviously symmetry is the way to go. But there's not really one thing that you can go with. It really depends on the audience, especially in commercial interior design. So really check out the audience that you have, check out the client that you have. So if it's commercial, could be anything reaching from stores to an office space. So you really have to take a look at, if you have, for example, if you're doing a law firm, it might be more important to have it in a symmetrical design, that we are not overwhelming the customers and the clients as much as if you, for example, have a bar where you really want to bring in people and you want to have that cool style. Answering the question with how many wood types and colors can be combined together, that is also very individual. I think that there is not really a rule what to combine in that case, but I think it is always good to leave some room for breathing, because wood can be very, very strong. And so if you have wood everywhere, it can be quite difficult to include a very cozy feeling, because it can be too overwhelming. So I would always say to combine between 2 to 3 wood types. I mean, 1 is totally fine as well, but I always love to use 2 to 3 different ones. So you could have, for example, a very light flooring, which could be oak, which might be white soaped or white oiled. And then you can have darker textures in the wood to add to that. So you could have something like a black mango wood coffee table, or also some dark brown elements in the kitchen, for example. But just make sure that you're not overdoing it. But I think different colors and wood types can be combined, definitely. So different wood textures, again, is super interesting to use, and I just like to work with a few different ones to make the room cozy. But then also I try to keep the style similar. So I do not want to have like a lacquered wood with then a very rustic one where you might have an open finish to the wood. I actually then try to find something that is quite similar in the texture and in the style, so that we are not creating too big of a difference. Favorite website to buy furniture from? Good question. I think there are quite many out there that offer good ones. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do advertisement from the German law, but the favorite websites to buy from, I mean, Nordic Nest is great, Finnish Design Shop is great, also West Wing, in case you are living in a country they deliver to. But if you are from the US as well, you can have Studio McGee, you can have Amber Interiors. So there are quite a lot of companies, but it's actually something I will write down and maybe do a blog post about that. But yeah, because there are also a few niche companies to buy from. And I just think the websites where you have a lot of different brands displayed is always the best, because obviously working with only one brand is always quite difficult, because that's just not as personal. So also things such as Connox and Geliebtes Zuhause in Germany and Austria are great places to buy. Is a mixture of modern and vintage pieces a must for an interesting look? I don't think so, because I think you actually need to be more careful about that, because if you create a look where you have a very, very modern design and then you have vintage pieces, it can also look completely off and just not matching. So it can be very random. So I always try to also combine different pieces that work well with one another. So for example, if you want to have a very minimalistic interior design style, it might not be good to have something that is very strong, even if it's a vintage piece. So I recently have clients who wanted a very minimalistic Scandinavian apartment with not a lot of stuff standing around, and they wanted to have it very neutral, very clean. And so incorporating vintage items such as a painting or something with the strong, also like the picture frame that you usually have there, is just not fitting very well to the style. So definitely not a must. I think it is definitely important to have a few pieces that might have some sort of texture in it, but it's definitely not a must to always have modern and vintage pieces included. Ooh, my favorite magazine for interior design. For sure, it is Elle Decor and also the AD. Those are my favorite ones. I always love what they display, that they're showing many different styles. And I also have to say, if you have the chance that you're somewhere abroad and you're traveling, always, always, always buy a few interior design magazines if that's something you like, because I always love to see what different countries have. And it's very interesting. And sometimes even the magazines are cheaper, even though you're not understanding the language. But yeah, that is quite cool. Favorite design shops in Paris? Ooh, Paris is difficult for me because I am not based in Paris. In Paris, I actually have to say that there are a lot of cool interior design shops, but that is more like niche related. So I think it's called thesheet, which is perfect if you want to have nice faucets. But there are also lamps that you can use that come from Paris. Also, L'Objet is very famous. So I think those are the brands that are quite nice, but they are kind of niche related again. So I don't know any big concept stores where you have all of the different brands, but yeah, the ones I named are quite good for that. And also antique shopping. Paris is great for antiques. So if you are into antiques and secondhand design furniture, that is a great place as well. And also Brussels, just to add. It's really a problem designing a small space room with so much in there, like clothes and all that. Yes, I agree. It can be quite difficult to design a smaller space. But my top tip for that is that you work with a lot of storage. Try to make storage the priority, but you can still have storage looking nicely. So you could have nice wardrobes, you could have nice sideboards, and just try to display some items that make sense, but don't overdo it. So, you know, you don't want to have a lot of clutter. And so try to keep things in boxes. You could also consider working with like a storage unit somewhere, and you could change your clothes seasonally. So that might be something for you to consider. And also maybe look at working with furniture that has a lot of functions. So you can actually include storage a lot of times in like sofas, under beds. You could also have some decor elements such as side tables that actually have space where you can place items inside. So things like that, smart storage is definitely important for that. If it's not too off topic, do you have any tips to work with the given room specifics in terms of a rather long and narrow room? Yes, of course. It's also actually something that I talk about in the online course when topic hallway and entrance, which is usually where we have a very narrow space. So I always recommend to use the walls. Always make sure that you include the walls in that, because in a narrow room where you do not have a lot of space to add furniture, like you cannot add a massive sofa or you cannot add something like a bench or a sideboard, then the walls are speaking to you. So if you do not want to have a very boring narrow room, just work with wall moldings, or you could work with paint or color. You would also work with wallpaper. And also, if it's possible for you, if you are, for example, renovating and planning the space individually, you could also include some things such as wall lamps or wall shelves. So the walls are always a great way to start with when you have a narrow room. Any favorite Italian stone shops? Whew, that is quite difficult to answer. I mean, there are great stone shops. Do you mean for tiles or do you mean actual stone? I can recommend Porcelanosa, which is a Spanish one, but they also deliver to Italy. They have stones, they have tiles. Marazzi, of course, is very famous in Italy. And there are a lot of very unique brands and also smaller brands in, especially in Tuscany, obviously, with the stone. So yeah, like you can use Marazzi tiles for that. That is always a great place to shop. And the X-Tone from Porcelanosa is great as well. I can recommend that. And I think they might also be having some stores where you can look at it in Italy. Also, Etsy is a great place if you're looking for basins and side tables and stuff. You are able to get a lot of very unique spaces from there. Just keep in mind, sometimes you need to pay customs, but there are great ways to work with that. Yes, Ronald, the interior platform, so the sheet is free, so you can just sign up. It's super, super easy. And yeah, I definitely recommend to use it because you have nothing to lose. And the sheet is just a company that really want to incorporate interior design because I think they, as a company, they just really, really love it themselves. So they are offering all of that for free, just as the webinar as well now. But I think it was a really nice talk to you. Very nice to end the evening that way. And I think I should do that more often with all of the live sessions. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. It was a pleasure to have you. And also thank you again to the sheet for making this possible. I hope you have a wonderful evening and I hope to see you very soon. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.